Hello, gorgeous people. Happy Monday morning, March 17th. I'm so thrilled you've decided to join me for a cup of coffee and a little star talk. First things first, let's go over the transits of the week. This week is, again, blessedly quite brief. We had a total lunar eclipse on March 14th. That might have been pretty intense. And we have a forthcoming partial solar eclipse in Aries that's happening on March 29th. But this week, March 17th through 23rd, we actually have a pretty cool solar week. We start on the 19th with the sun conjoining Neptune on its way out of Pisces, in the last degree of Pisces, right on that threshold. From Pisces to Aries, the sun will conjoin Neptune, move into Aries, marking the spring equinox, and then conjoin Venus on her retrograde journey back to Pisces. During this week, we also have the moon moving from late Libra all the way to late Capricorn. So the condition of the sun is really important this week, especially as we're setting up for a solar eclipse in the sign of the sun's exaltation, which is Aries. The sun will conjoin Neptune and then enter Aries and conjoin Venus. Those are the three main transits that are happening this week, and it really feels like there are two storylines for these last 2 weeks of March. So we have the sun leaving a place of Piscean, misty obfuscation, like a thick Jupiter soup in Pisces with Neptune, Jupiter-Neptune soup. And Jupiter, which hosts Pisces, is currently not all that clear in Gemini either, because it's in detriment. Jupiter prefers to behave in a visionary capacity and to behave on this large scale and do bold work. Gemini, in many ways, is all about details and receipts and little tiny pieces of the work to do that add up to these big visions that Jupiter's got. So when we think about what's happening in Pisces as being unclear, especially because of Neptune's influence, well, we have to double down on that because Jupiter, the host of Pisces, is also not that clear right now. But the sun, on the other hand, is coming out of this arc, a long, dark winter arc. Frozen earth in Capricorn, and then the insecurity of the harvest in snowy, cold, dark Aquarius. And then we have the sun in those mystical, hallucinatory dregs of the Pisces soup with the Neptunian mist hanging low on all of the land. So now the sun is moving into Aries, which is the sign of its exaltation and its pride. Now, I really, really hate Claude Monet. I am loath to give Claude Monet's bland, mid artwork a single nother eyeball to consider it. And yet, here I am conjuring up this picture for you. This is Claude Monet's Impression Sunrise from 1872. This is such a fitting visual metaphor for what's going on right now. We have this proud, radiant, ceaseless, perfect, divine sun that cuts through impression, our unreliable vision, the misty morning on the waterfront, the marine layer. If you've ever lived somewhere with a marine layer before, like I have, I'm from San Diego, you know that there's a phenomenon where a misty, dreary morning can give way into this radiant, bold, beautiful, warming, bright, sometimes sweaty, annoyingly hot, clear day full of like honest work and heroics and all of the other things that the sun wants in Aries. This is a little bit what I'm feeling for this story of the sun meeting and conjoining Neptune at the threshold of Pisces and then bursting forth into its exaltation of Aries to conjoin with Venus and to bring in the spring equinox. It is bursting forth into its pride in Aries, where it is a vaunted guest. So let's talk for a minute about the sun's condition in Aries. So the sun rules Leo by domicile. We think of the sun as the domicile ruler of Leo, and that's true. In Leo, the sun is a self-sustaining, self-controlled, kingly expression. It is hierarchical. And the sun rules with direct influence in Leo. It controls its influence and its context. The sun in Aries, on the other hand, the sign of its exaltation, is a powerful, sort of heroic, honored expression of solar quality. It's associated more with victory and bold leadership and authority and exertion. It's not just comfortable, like a bored king in its castle. It is a lauded guest, an exalted and celebrated guest. A little bit more like, I think, the Pope. When the Pope is traveling and the Pope is wanting for nothing, but ultimately not in control of the context he's in, the sun in Aries is an exalted guest. Not totally in charge, but very well appointed, very, very much lauded and seen after. But of course, Aries is Mars's lair. So it is not the sun or the king in its own throne room. An important side note to that, because Aries is ruled by Mars, we need to consider where Mars is and what Mars is doing. And of course, Mars is currently miserably out of context in the moon's realm of Cancer. So something to keep in mind there. But of course, as the sun moves into Aries, we mark the spring equinox at 0 degrees of Aries, which is the beginning of the zodiacal new year, the beginning of the zodiac. And it is a day of the year where both the day and night are equal in length, which means that from that moment on, the light in terms of the solar year and the solar quality and our lived experience here on Earth, the light is building in power and intensity and length as we move through the year. This is kind of the underpinnings of where heroism in Aries and some of these archetypal associations we have with Aries stem from. The victory of the light and the light returning to us here on Earth. It's a really important point right now because it is the site of the Saturn-Neptune conjunction that will happen in February 2026. And there's plenty of teasing action that happens right in those early degrees of Aries this month. Every culture has its own series of traditions and associations with the spring equinox. And I would really recommend that you do a little digging, Googling, thinking, ChatGPTing, and discover some of what your cultural heritage or cultures that you're interested in do for spring equinox and do to mark this time of the year. You'll find that there are some pretty fascinating rites and rituals. But we'll talk about that a little more when we talk about how I'm going to be using the astrological energy of this week. This solar story really progresses with the Venus cazimi that happens on March 22nd. Now, because the sun is moving forward and Venus is moving backward, this is what is sometimes called an inferior cazimi, whereas the superior cazimi would be when Venus and the sun are both moving direct. Of course, the sun never moves anything but direct, and that is why it is divine. This one's pretty interesting because the sun is moving in one way, into exaltation, into recognition, into its happy place in Aries. Venus is moving the opposite way, retrograde, also back though into her exaltation in Pisces. And it's pretty trite to use a lover's analogy where Venus is concerned astrologically, but I'll allow myself this cliche because there is a moment here that feels like two lovers meeting. I'm imagining the scene of like two lovers meeting for the last time. They know they're not going to see each other in a while. They both know that they're headed different ways and that they're headed where they're supposed to go, and that they are ultimately different people. They can't be together, period. The sun is moving forth into its exaltation in Aries, where Venus doesn't want to go. Venus is moving backwards into her exaltation in Pisces, where the sun can't go either. And it's kind of reminding me of this beautiful song from Billie Holiday, of course, I'll Be Seeing You. And it's a song my grandmother used to sing all the time. I put her little picture here just to honor that memory. And it is a beautiful song. I'm imagining two people slow dancing, listening to this song on a Victrola or something. Another thing that was coming through, like this Carrie James Marshall painting called Slow Dance. So imagine this painting with the song from Billie Holiday, I'll Be Seeing You. That's exactly what's coming through for this inferior Venus cazimi in early Aries. There's also a John Mayer song called Slow Dancing in a Burning Room that I think is kind of on point, but not quite as poignant as Billie Holiday on the Victrola. So all of this sun stuff and that's happening in Aries and this Venus cazimi and the equinox this week, all of it together is a little bit of a dance. The sun hits Neptune, it rolls into Aries, and it hits Venus retrograding, heading back into Pisces. It's kind of bringing up this concept of amor fati for me, which is, of course, a turn of phrase that means love of fate or love your fate. And it's this conceptual idea in a philosophical context that one should not just accept what is happening to you or what happens to you, good or bad, but radically, with a full raging heart, embrace everything that happens, whether hardship or excitement, whether exaltation or detriment. It is sort of a philosophy of radical affirmation, which makes it pretty different from Stoicism and a lot of the Saturnian and resignation-oriented tenets of some of the Stoic philosophies that traditional astrology is rooted in. But there's a sense that suffering and loss, of course, across both of those traditions, suffering and loss are considered integral parts of one's story. But in Amor Fati, you sort of radically and maybe maniacally love your fate, knowing that any pain that comes your way or hardship or turbulence will turn into wisdom. And a sort of, I don't think Nietzsche meant it this way, but for me, it kind of feels like a divine surrender sometimes. In a way, we can kind of think of this metaphorically by imagining alchemy not turning mercury into gold, but turning life's suffering and trials and tribulations and what's been going on for you and what you're holding and your resistance and your tension and your weight, alchemically turning that strife and suffering into wisdom through the crucible of the sun's light. It's not a passive sort of acceptance. It's a fiery embrace. And it's kind of like the art, the developing and unfolding art of saying yes to everything that comes your way. Now, with that in mind, I actually have a couple prompts or questions or snacks for thought based on some of the concepts that we've talked about for this week. So what part of your fate do you resist the most strongly? What part of your life feels like a sucking pull towards fate that you resist and fight and try to argue against, but it feels fated? And I wonder if you can write a short story imagining yourself loving that part of your lot in life, or a short story imagining that this is a skill of yours or a piece of you or a piece of your lot in life that you are recognized and lauded for, perhaps even for undergoing, but perhaps championing. What illusions are burning away from you? Is there clarity you can find in a metaphysical or metaphorical fire that you could step through? And is there illusion that can be burning away from you? I was also thinking a little bit about the Odyssey and about how that's essentially a big wild goose chase lost at sea story, which is a little what the sun's been going through with Neptune and Pisces. So when Odysseus comes home to Ithaca and is no longer even recognized, I mean, like, what does returning to your place of purpose look like now? What did your place of purpose look like when you were quite young, or maybe even 10 years ago? And also, what part of yourself do you feel is only seen or witnessed in those last dance moments? So imagining the lovers having their last dance together, what part of each other, and if you're the protagonist in the story, what part of you is only seen or witnessed in that moment deeply? And how might you honor that part of yourself more often? Now, last things last, the moon will be transiting from late Libra to late Capricorn. And this is some of the most challenging parts of where the moon can go in the zodiac while Mars is in Cancer. Because don't forget that Mars's dignity depends on the moon's dignity, because the moon is hosting Mars currently. Now, as the moon moves from Libra, she goes into Scorpio, which typically is a difficult place for the moon to be in a transiting expression. Natal astrology, of course, is different, but the moon is in the sign of her fall in Scorpio. While Mars is in Cancer, she does enjoy mutual reception, which is a condition where Mars is in the temple of the moon in Cancer, And the moon is in the temple of Mars in Scorpio. So they are hosting each other. And this gives them more dignity than they would otherwise have. From there, the moon moves through Sagittarius and into Capricorn, which is the sign of her detriment. This is a little more difficult. Now, Mars is exalted in Capricorn, and they will be able to witness each other directly, but it's through opposition. So this is actually a pretty difficult place for the moon to be. So this is some of the times when, if you are noticing choppy waters throughout the week, stop and take a moment and just look to where the moon is. This is my favorite way to track the moon. Now, tracking the moon every day, we've talked about before, is a little advanced and overwhelming, quite frankly. But if things unfold in your life and things feel difficult for seemingly no reason, that's a good time to look at where the moon is. So pay attention to where the moon is going this week and how it feels for you. If a lot of what I've been saying about Amor Fati and the lovers and the sun bursting forth in clarity in the fog doesn't seem to align with your experience this week, it's likely that there's something lunar at play, or maybe something important that we're missing about your natal astrology. All right, we're coming to the part of the show where I talk about how I, as a animist, pagan, astrologer, human being, use the astrological energy of this week. And we are still fully in eclipse season. This time between eclipses is not something I feel empowered to harness. We had a pretty cursed analogy last week about using a haunted power drill to change the screw on your eyeglasses. And that still applies for this week and next week and pretty much a week or two after the eclipses. These eclipses, however, happen to bookend the spring equinox, which is a time of importance to me. Following the solar year, it is a major, major moment for rebirth, renewal, reemergence, and it is the zodiacal new year. This is important to me because I do have a pretty close connection with the archetypal solar expression. I do work and commune with Apollo, who is the sun god, and that is probably how I'll be using this week and this equinox. There are some other ways that you can do so. So my friends over at the Lingen Institute, they will have a big bonfire for the spring equinox every year, and they burn all sorts of letters to ancestors. Manifestation and the law of attraction also is a really common way to use solar energy. I have found in my own astrological research that that kind of manifesting is really closely linked to the solar. So this is a good time if you're wanting to do a letter to yourself or some of these other classical manifestation rituals. I think with Venus retrograde, this could even be a really good time to write a letter, not just to your future self, but perhaps also to your past self. And maybe that is a way that you can intellectually, if not in an embodied way or an enheartened way, maybe you can see that you've alchemized some of your trials and tribulations into wisdom. And so work with solar deities can be really powerful during the spring equinox because, again, it marks that time of year where the light begins to increase and increase and increase. Now, that doesn't have to feel formal, and you don't have to know a solar deity's name to do that. It could be as easy as on a Sunday, spending some time in the sun at the park. Sometimes on Sundays, I'll wake up with sunrise and I'll do sun salutations. Sometimes I just recharge in the sun like a lizard, which is a practice that my boyfriend lovingly calls lizard mode. Wearing gold jewelry or creating a drawing of some kind, using the color yellow, burning a yellow candle. Again, just simply thinking and putting your intentions toward the sun and experiencing the sun in real time as a devotional act, celebrating it in some way, perhaps with fire, would be a really, really in-line way to use this energy that's happening this week. All right, I'm just about done with my coffee, which means that we must be just about done with the show. I hope to see you guys next week. We're going to have a longer episode than usual because next week is packed with really important transits, and we're also maybe going to have a special guest on the show. I guess you'll have to tune in and find out. If anything I've said in this episode seems to track with your week or jogs your memory or inspires you, please do let me know in the comments, DMs, or emails. I would love to feature your experiences on the show next week, I'm going to be kicking off a new little segment where I work in listener experiences. Have a great week.